The purpose of today is basically to, hopefully the audience, we can share a lot of the mistakes that have occurred in 2025 and 2024 with our organization. So I'm pretty excited to kind of share all the failures that have occurred, just so other people don't come across the same kind of mistakes. And I would say 2025 may have been one of our hardest years. Not so much financially, but just everything combined happening at once. And the world's in constant chaos. And today we're going to basically talk about ways to prevent chaos, how to measure performance so that way you're driving the organization. And what I'm excited about today is to be able to discuss this with Kate, who's a board certified behavior analyst, and Sam, who's a CPA. And the two of these guys have really helped me and our organization through some of the most challenging times.
I guess the best place to start right now is from inception. So when did you guys realize that there was an issue or an underlying issue? And what steps did you start taking from the very beginning?
Yeah, I guess. Well, the first was we got denied a bank loan. to be honest, to be straight up.
That's when I found out there was an issue.
Yeah. That's when we brought Sam in. So I guess it was pretty much realizing that the data we were presenting to banks was not as accurate as they wanted it to be, as well as pretty messy when it came to a lot of intercompany transfers, management fees, and we have like 16 companies, so that's an easy way for it to get a little bit messy. And by having messy data without clean data, it basically got us close to making very poor decisions and a near miss of really failing the organization.
And at that time, Sam, you were new to BDA. So when all this was going on, were you almost in thought of what did I get myself into?
I'm definitely.
He said that to me.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe you dragged me into this mess.
I definitely underestimated. I always look back to my former boss telling me that I didn't know what I was getting into and get ready for the details. And I laughed at him. I was like, dude, I'm doing the accounting. I look at every single transaction. All I do is details. And but he was right. The expectations I had coming in far underweighed what actually was needed to push the company forward, right? But it was all stuff that I'd seen before. It wasn't anything that was out of our realm, right? When I first came in, I'll never forget getting a call saying, hey, we got a potential client here. I was working as an outside consultant, and I had no clue about it. I would look at new clients constantly, evaluate their financial statements, and I hopped on a call with Joe and just dove in and was like, man, we got some problems here, but there was nothing solidified or hammered down, and I figured, you know what, we'll see how this goes. And I was at a Cowboys game in December, and I was sick. I was so sick, and fever and everything. And I got an email from the partners and Brett, and it was like, hey, we're really starting to move on this company. They're going to need our help. And I remember I drove home down to San Antonio after the Cowboys game, Cowboys versus Bucks. Baker threw a pass to Rashad White. He fumbled it, lost me my fantasy football championship. But all good. Went down to San Antonio like 11, 12 p.m., emailed Brett, and I was like, here's all the things that are wrong with your financial statements and what you need to do to improve. And he responded immediately, and he was like, this is fire emoji.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I just wanted straight feedback.
Yeah, and I was like, well, I've never heard a CEO respond so rapidly with emojis. So it was it was pretty unique experience there. And then, I hear some silence about it, and I'm like, I don't know, I saw these problems, we'll see. And you hear the rumblings, and I remember it was February, and I get a call, and it was like, hey, it's full go. It's full go. They need our help. And we hopped on a call shortly after, and I was sitting there going, man, here we go again, going through another grind, getting through the solutions, closing accounting books, providing financial statements.
Because you had done this many times with many companies,
Yep.
not knowing necessarily what the depth and breadth of of what you were going to be dealing
Exactly.
with.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so before I'd work for companies that were acquired by private equity, they'd usually come in, clear out the staff that are there, fresh start. Well, in the accounting world, when you bring in new staff, accounting's a very institutional knowledge base that you have to learn over time that you can't just get right when you're there. So many of the companies I'd worked for had already fired their staff, brought in outside consultants, and the consultants weren't up to par for the task at hand. So many times I was training teams and getting them up to speed. So that was no different with BDA. I think we did a good job getting the accounting department up to speed, implementing controls and processes that we'll get into. But it was everything else that I realized really needed systems and controls in place to drive the company forward towards the growth that we've experienced in past years. You know, I want to really push us back to being the BDA gold standard.
When Sam gave you that feedback and the loan was denied, were there any signs prior to that that you were like, I feel like something's off, but I trust my people, so
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep pushing through this? And then when you got those two things, obviously that's when rubber met the road and we had to change things.
Yeah, it became real. But I would say maybe a year and a half ago, I started having a gut instinct that things weren't exactly the way the data was being presented. You kind of know that when you're looking around the room and you're facilitating a meeting and you don't get eye contact. Sometimes there's deflections in answers. You just start getting vibes that something isn't right. And I think that some of that was really because I just wasn't auditing things and I wasn't really checking. And that, you know, for the longest time, I would say that, you know, that's on me. And part of it was that I couldn't necessarily audit and check just because the numbers weren't as accurate as they could be. And starting to realize that when you're making decisions on data that's inaccurate, it really compounds future decisions in a really bad way. So making the decisions has been now in the past few months, we have clean data where we can make decisions that are impacting the lives of so many kids and staff that it just feels good now to kind of get that behind us.
Delegation of tasks is obviously something that a CEO often has to do. So with that, is there some type of feedback that you can give other CEOs to say, although you're passing off these tasks to other individuals, you should still be completing competency checks or those audits throughout the entirety of your career?
Yeah, 100%. So we kind of based on that first book that we had written on self-monitoring being a real key component that drives performance, we did a lot of self-monitoring where the narrative, there would be a lot of narratives based on the self-monitoring that wasn't based on the raw data.
Mm-hmm.
So basically having people self-monitor without having checks and balances on what they're reporting out and not going back to the raw data. Something I really learned from Sam was that you know, it took a good 6 months to get to the raw data and get to the accurate raw data, but that was probably one of the most eye-opening things, that you can't just self-monitor and report out without someone giving reciprocal feedback and checking on it. So, you know, when you think about it, there's always drift in performance. So you could set expectations, goals, have your numbers clean, but even if they're perfect, over time, things happen in life and human behavior just it drifts away from the goals that you have. It drifts away. So self-monitoring, report out, if it's not based on real hard data, you start getting narratives. And the narratives became longer and longer, and our meetings became longer and longer. And as a result of that, we would have one meeting after another on a Monday and Wednesday, and you remember that. And there was a lot of talk and a lot of explanations as to why things were not going in the right direction.
Fluff.
As opposed to solutions. Mm-hmm. I like sitting here with the two of you because what I've come to realize is that there are people that constantly come up with reasons why something cannot occur, but surrounding myself around folks that are always looking for a solution based on the data. They're the kind of folks that you want to surround yourself as a leader and as a CEO.
Is there something that you can look back and say that we were measuring every week that felt safe, but was an actual reason for why the business was bleeding?
Yeah, revenue. I mean, what we were. One of the challenges is that we are a pay-for-performance organization. So
Can you go into that a little bit
Yeah.
for maybe for people who don't know? It's not
Yeah.
like a time-based thing.
Yeah, so for the last 21 years, we've had a model that was very successful until we scaled very rapidly in the last 5 years. So pay for performance was something that people could self-monitor. We could just glaze over and check that it was accurate, and then people would get bonuses based on the performance. But the problem was that the performance was drifting from the key performance indicators that were being reported out. We were making decisions on how to bonus people. We would basically bonus out millions of dollars, but the decisions about bonuses were often based on leading measures, such as accrual revenue that was billed out but not collected. So we would end up over bonusing based on data that was inaccurate because it wasn't what actually occurred. So there were the lagging measures or what we needed instead of bonusing people on the leading measures, which was what was billed out. So I always thought we had a really nice system of really rewarding people even with passive income. But I also realized from Sam and the consulting groups that by rewarding people on the leading metrics, it also was based on not even having what Sam and what the accounting world calls the hard close. So I started realizing that you can't bonus people out. This is probably a lot of the folks that probably listen to our channel or have much more business security than I do. I just came into this because I was a behavior analyst, But I think one big lesson learned is that you don't bonus people before the money comes in.
And that's a hard thing too, because it's different than running a normal company. ABA companies, you kind of like have to put the money up out front to pay people.
Yeah.
And wait for the reimbursement from schools or in private equity insurance companies, things like that. And I think that's something people don't realize, that sets our types of organizations apart from others.
Yeah.
It's like a waiting game.
Yeah, because we, as good behavior analysts, we wanted rewards and incentives to be given very immediately. We gave them so immediately that we were running out of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, to this point, we were paying out bonuses. I mean, it may take us, with some of our clients, 40, 50 days to collect, just depending, right? Just natural pace of AR and collections, depending on the client. But we would bonus people out within the 2 weeks of us billing, right? So we were giving out money before we ever received any money. And then there was kind of a convolution between the key metrics. When I first came in, one of the big things that Brett was hammering on was the cash flows report, because that's what they would use to really drive the company. But it was funny because cash is actually the ultimate lagging indicator. And when you're a company of this size, you work off of accrual income, and there's no such thing as cash net income. You use a treasury management system to manage your cash, make sure you're gonna be able to pay all your expenses, debt, etc. And so a lot of it was, when I first came in, is seeing these metrics that aren't standardized across the states and aren't really giving us the data that we're looking for. And then we're rewarding people off of it. So I think that was kind of a big shift that we had to do, is what KPIs matter and how do we want to track them, and then how often do we want to get them out to the state leaders. When I first came on, like accounting is done on a monthly basis. So you get 12 feedback points a year if you do it just off the P&L, right? But as behavior analysts, that's not nearly enough, right? And so being a part of the field now, I see how they work with the kids and I see how rapidly they can change the behaviors. And so that's in a one-on-one setting where we have very skilled individuals doing it. When you try to apply those same principles to an organization of our size, you don't have the rapid change that you would see in a clinic setting. So when you look at a company like this, absolutely massive, operating across 7 states, it's like a living organism. And you have a brain and the heart. And we got the brain right here, and we got the heart in the corporate center, right? And or maybe it's vice versa. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if I got the brain part. I realized I got humbled quite a bit in 2025 because, you know, literally, I felt that I was leading from the heart as opposed to numbers and brain. That's the best way to put it, right?
So you got the heart and the brain in the corporate, right? And then we have all of our operations, the people in the field that are actually delivering services to the kids. They're the fingers, they're the knees, they're the legs of the organization. And so without the people in the field, then you got no arms and legs and you're just a torso. But without the thought leadership and the corporation headquarters and the admin team supporting, then you only have arms and legs. So in order to put it all together, you need everybody working in harmony. And that's been a big push that we have, is trying to pull all the states together, get everybody on the same metrics so we're all measuring across the same thing, and getting people on a cadence to where they know what they're being measured on. So I think that's been a big push, is getting the data correct and then getting everybody aligned on the report outs that we need.
And that's a large feat in itself.
Yeah.
Because every state, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure you have your own views, each one of them has their own company culture. So to put each state on the spot and kind of, not on blast, but, you know, keep them accountable for their behavior and the data that they're producing, and give them that feedback, and then pull them all together and say, okay, now we all have to work together. It's very difficult, especially if, as a new person entering the organization and giving that feedback. So is there anything that you can give to our listeners to say, like, if you're new in the organization, you're kind of doing this flip to bring it from 0 to 100 again?
Yeah.
Here are some things you can do so you're not the most hated person in the room. You know what I mean?
Smile. That's the first one, you know.
Buy donuts, yeah.
You got to be friendly. Yeah, I think what I was telling Brett is that my career experience before this really led into me being able to take on this role and do it successfully, right? And so with working with these companies and them bringing in people, it's about getting people up, training them, and letting them know we're all on the same team. Like, I'm not coming here, if I'm giving you feedback on something that you messed up in the accounting statements, they need to know I'm not doing it of, why are you doing this? You're really messing up. I'm coming down on you. They need to know I'm saying, hey, please don't do this again. I got your back. This is on me. I should have checked it. You know, that's how you get buy-in from your employees, is they know that you're there with them, right? And so I think that was a big thing that I did, is just come in and I didn't point any fingers. I didn't assign nefarious acts to anybody. I just said, we're just trying to figure out what's going on, who's going to help. And I think that's always been an effective approach, because as soon as you start pointing fingers, they get pointed back at you. And so just really trying to get buy-in from the team, letting them know that all I'm doing is trying to work through problems and come up with solutions. And then they feel more comfortable giving solutions too. I think like a brainstorming environment is so effective, but the only way a brainstorming environment is effective is if you let all ideas through, regardless of how good you think they are. Because if you're in an effective brainstorming session, it'll be 2 hours in and then boom, there's the idea, right? But you had to go through all of the bad ideas to get there. So when you're working in an organization and you're game planning a problem, it's the same thing, right? Like we'll work through reports and it's iteration of the report until we get the data right. And we got people that get irritated when the report's not right? But it gets all the way down to, is this a user error or a system error? then we get a system error. Okay, now we can fix it, right? And we can get the report going. So in past, we may have ran into resistance before and been like, oh, the report's not working, let's just can it. When it really, we should just drive through to get this report to work, because this is how we're going to automate the report outs, right? And then that way we don't have to drive people for the information that we need. It's readily available. So I think that's been a big thing. Is Brett always makes fun of me for the word cadence, but that's
It is a new word in all of our vocabularies now.
yes. But it's one that I've lived by, right? Because accounting is very formulaic. It has a month-end close that you do this, then this, then this, and then you send out reports, right? And when I'm in these ops meetings that Brett's talking about, Monday and Wednesday slogs, right? We're talking 8-10 hour meetings, and not a single minute of it is fun. There's not a single time we're laughing. It is very
Brutal.
Yeah, it is brutal. And so but you got to get through that to get to the other side and get everybody on the same page, you know? And so that's just part of it, is just being tenacious.
Yeah, and one of the things I noticed that got us where we needed to be is most of the time when I've met accountants and CPAs, they had more introverted personalities where they would dig into the books, didn't really want to talk to people. But what we were fortunate in this circumstance, especially being in the field of behavior analysis, dealing with people every day, because the people are the assets. You know, the people, well, I remember talking with Sam, I was like, the people going up and down the elevator are the assets. It's not like cost of goods sales isn't like we have a bunch of widgets that we're selling. It's like, what matters most is their happiness, because that rubs off on the learners. But what was fascinating was that I saw someone that I thought would be introverted, that could deal with the human end of things and pull out of the books and actually dive in and be open to ideas, instead of, although accounting is very rigid in the accounting principles, Sam would be open to ideas and really hearing people out to understand why we were doing stupid stuff that we were doing, right? So
Why, right?
Yeah, and why were you doing it?
Yeah.
And sometimes we were like, we just always did, and it just wasn't the right reason. But what was really pretty incredible was that when you were talking about not just coming in and pointing fingers, you would go one step further, where not only did you not point fingers, you would literally roll up your shirt sleeves. If someone said it couldn't be done, Sam would just get in there and do it. And at some point, that garnered a level of respect where I heard many fewer people saying that it couldn't be done, honestly.
I mean, it makes me
For real.
think back to a lot of the same language that we give newly certified BCBAs. Like, don't be that clipboard BCBA. Go in there,
Do it.
quote unquote, get your hands dirty, show them how things can be done, and that you're willing to do what it is that you're trying to get them to do. And it creates a lot of that buy-in and showing and modeling that it can be accomplished. So I do agree that helps fast track building a rapport with staff.
Yeah. And as the meetings were going on with clean, accurate data, over time, there were fewer and fewer narratives as to why something can't be done, or explaining a problem and why it occurs, and it just became a lot more solution-oriented. The other thing that Sam did that I thought was just really good practice is that he never made it personal. So it was always systems oriented. And I think that was the accounting background too, that, you got to follow GAAP standards. Here's how artificial intelligence can correct this and then create a long-term solution. And by constantly focusing on the systems and not the people and blaming, that's also what got the buy-in. So like 2026 already is a whole different year. I mean, now I can, for the first time in about 2 years, actually focus on the people part of it,
Right.
and not chase my tail and constantly worry, are we going to pay this bank loan off?
Right.
I
do think that there's a fine balance between being human, but also like not taking things personally. And that's where, like you're saying, relying on the data is so important.
Yeah. And we did come from, and you saw that, like, we came from different worlds. In the accounting corporate world there, I remember that if an accountant would be questioned, say by a partner or something in a large firm, like a place that Sam would work, so Sam would take so much accountability for the results, and historically in the corporate world, if someone would question something that an accountant would do, what I learned is that questioning was really offensive in some ways, especially when you take accountability and your work product is excellent, like Sam's, right? But I was asking questions because I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Right.
And it was so funny because there were moments they were rough moments until trust was built. There was a point where we had a moment where I had asked Sam a question, and realizing that my intent for asking it was much different than the history in the corporate world where he came from. Mine was just to understand it, and that ended up building a trust. And it's hard to measure intent, especially as behavior analysts. But when trust is built, you don't we always talk about the rope of trust. In the very beginning, it was like, yeah, you come from a different world, and if someone's questioning you, you're wondering, okay, what's their motive? Are they trying to fire me? Is there a buddy or someone that they're trying to promote? What's the motive behind the questioning?
Right.
Me, it was just I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and by asking a lot of questions, I was able to learn that the rope of trust was built because each time he gave me an answer and I was able to understand it, and I would make a promise and deliver on it. That rope of trust got stronger and stronger.
Right.
So in a way, we were communicating less and less because that rope of trust doesn't just unwind very quickly, So intent often is, I guess it could be defined as your history of following through, and were your motives for the good of the word I learned was like, is it good for the entire republic, not just one state or one person? So that was eye-opening to me. I just feel like I'm a constant student, and I was getting stale where I'm like, who could I learn from, and how can they not rip me off? Like literally. It's true.
No, it's funny to look back on, right? I think a big part of me coming in and just getting comfortable. It's funny, we'll talk about it all the time, right? Just like how crazy of a year it's been, and but I look back I think it was May, and I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go and do this. And I lived in Florida, and we got headquarters in New Jersey. And I've been up here basically every other week since then, right? And but just keep pushing, right? And it's just all about keep pushing. But to Brett's point about the questions, the coming in from the world that I come from is a way different world than the ABA therapy world, and especially BDA, right? Just the corporate structure, how everything's built, hierarchies at other companies I was at, you couldn't sit down and have a podcast with the CEO, So the ability to talk with executives and everything has been huge.
Personability.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just building the rope of trust with Brett, right? So it's funny, that was one of the big shifts in my head when I came in was asking questions, right? Because in the world I was from, you're only getting questioned if you did something wrong, right? And so we come into meetings and Brett's asking me gap questions, and I'm like,
because I didn't know what gap stood for.
And I'm like, Brett, we closed.
I thought it was the difference between how much money we were losing and what they were telling me we had. That was the gap.
So, you need an extra A, GAAP. There you go. But, generally accepted accounting principles, so everybody knows. But so there's standards that you have to abide by, right? And so I'm trying to implement these standards, and something like an allowance for doubtful accounts is tough to explain to non-accountants, right? And so I'm prepping for the audit, changing the financial statements to align with GAAP, and then having questions come down on me, and I'm like, I swear I'm doing everything right, So, but I had to understand the intent of the questions, and it was really for Brett to understand the financial statements at the level that I do, right? And so he wants to understand what every number means in here. And to take it a step further is not just for him to understand, it's for him to provide feedback to the staff in the field. And I think that's been one of the big things that I'm like really happy to start seeing over the past 2 months is Brett's leadership, like capabilities and how he's grown the company to what it is. You could see it like really starting to come back with the group chats, with the feedback, with the constant. He just needed data to act on that was accurate, right? And so like that's one of the big things that I've seen over the past few months where I'm like, man, we're starting to get feedback and I can see how effective his leadership is in the field. You just got to give somebody like him the tools to do it effectively, you know? So that's been another huge push that we've made in the past few months.
Yeah, it seemed that just getting the tools and getting the accurate numbers, once we had those things in place and the systems, and I know we'll talk a little bit about artificial intelligence today, but just some of the things that I had learned from you was also it would help us catch anomalies in data. So by looking at financials, running it through the appropriate artificial intelligence systems, I could spot something that was standing out, and then I could ask the questions as opposed to always getting someone's narrative about why that was an anomaly.
You know, yeah, I think there's a few words that have come into play. Cadence is one of them. Another one we always talk about is single source of truth, right? So in the accounting world, you always want your general ledger to be your single source of truth. That ties out to everything. That's where all the data is accurate. All these other systems, they can be wrong. If your GL's right, you're going to pass the audit, right? And so, you know, effectively. But so you always want a single source of truth. And one of the many things that we've gone through is spreadsheets everywhere.
Like 100 different spreadsheets, and you're trying to figure out which was the last one.
Exactly.
Which is the truth.
And I always joke with Brett, I'm like, all right, one of these days we're going to nominate somebody out here to clean up our Google Drive. Who wants to volunteer? And nobody will ever volunteer for that, right?
No, that's good.
But it's because
and I would rely on Kate. She would basically have the discipline to organize, help me get organized, at least on one folder.
Yeah.
And we had that right, you know. But it would be overwhelming to look at all the spreadsheets, all the different databases, click on the top right-hand corner just to see when it was edited last.
Yep.
You know. But I'm sorry to
No, you're totally right. So it was like, so all the data is scattered, fragmented, not accurate, doesn't tie to each other. I mean, one of the problems we had is just getting our systems that should tie together to tie together and have the outputs make sense. It's another term that I probably brought into the organization we got here was a black box, right? And so I was like, every process we go into is a black box. And so what that means is like you can see the inputs and you can see the outputs, but you don't know how the outputs got or the inputs got to the outputs. So it goes into the black box rumbles, and then it gives you your outputs. And it was like every single process we dove into, we could find the inputs, we could find the outputs, we couldn't find out how it was done in between.
What the hell was going in the box?
Exactly.
What was happening in that box?
I'm like, so here's where we started, here's where we ended, how do we get here, you know?
So that black box gave us another new term, which was standard operating procedures, or SOPs.
Yes.
So now everything in the organization has an SOP, or it's being created if we find that it doesn't have one.
Yeah, to standardize and replicate.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a CEO perspective, can you discuss how important it is now being on the other side of the coin?
Yeah. Well, you brought up something interesting, which was about each state having different nuances and trying to keep the culture, you know, but there are just certain standard accounting principles and behavior analytic organizational principles that have to occur no matter what the culture is.
Yeah.
You know, so having the standard operating procedures and building them out, what I learned was that at least the bare bones of the framework needed standardization across states. We couldn't even measure performance, and even it was always comparing apples to oranges on basic accounting principles that were needed to drive the organization, that were the engine. So the standard operating procedures, I know this sounds like common sense. It's just we started this business 21 years ago, and we didn't really have the need for standard operating procedures. It would be like, yeah, I trust you. Hey, let's do this, and
Almost like it's not broke, don't fix it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So having the standard operating procedures would have the basic framework that was needed, and then the states could basically measure, add their own culture to it. California is going to have a drastically different culture than New Jersey is,
Mhm.
and they remind us of that.
Yeah. Speaking of culture, how do you guys deal, or how do we deal as a team or a leadership to navigate when culture is usually the driving force for making decisions? And sometimes people get stuck in old ways and they're not exactly conducive for the entire company. How do you navigate that without ruffling a lot of
Yeah,
feathers
or
damaging rapport?
yeah, basically, that's a good question. I mean, basically, the results would speak for themselves. So you could have whatever culture you want and nuance the way you do things, but at the end of the day, if the stakeholder that we need to expand and help more kids is the bank loan,
Mhm.
then that's a stakeholder. A stakeholder also would be our employees that are getting profit sharing, you know. So these basics were so important for the organization, and I'm really glad that I had a sounding board, so I didn't feel out there on an island, because I would go to a lot of ABA conferences, and there were so few BCBAs that were kind of doing what we're doing,
Mhm.
and I really felt really lonely to not be able to speak to someone about the numbers. But the key was that the results would drive the discussion, and the data would drive the discussion. So at some point, it doesn't matter. I started to realize I was worried so much about each state's culture and not upsetting them,
Right.
and being extremely polite. And but then I realized that the results are what keep the lights on, and it didn't matter how polite and nice I could be, it wouldn't end well if I continued being polite and nice and not use standard methods and good measurement. So in the end, you can be polite and nice,
And your
and
company close.
you
Yeah.
close, so it doesn't matter how nice you are to people, and you help no kids.
Right.
No margin, no mission.
I'd like to go back to when we were talking about the company was bleeding. You were running out of money. We were denied a loan. It's a lot to process in a very short period of time when things have to happen rapidly. So how did you guys pick what to fix first when everything was kind of broken at the same time?
That was interesting, because there was a moment, and it was like me, you, Katie, and the payroll team, and we were in there, and I just wasn't sure exactly what to measure, but Sam was, and there was a moment where I kept asking for different KPIs and kind of changing the goalpost, because I didn't know what direction to go. I remember Sam's like, "What the hell do you want?" And I was like, I just want to not go bankrupt. Do you remember?
Yeah,
I'm like, I was bankrupt like 20 years ago. I just don't want that to happen again. And it helped me get a little more focused. And I just want to be brutally honest and transparent. Doing this 21 years, we're playing the long game. I had no interest in selling the organization, and what occurred in the past year and a half to 2 years, there was a point where even loaning the business money, not knowing if I'll ever see it again, knowing that as a single owner, even if you're the scope that we are, people can still try to pierce the corporate veil, and basically feeling that there was a lack of data that I could trust, or people that I could trust with the data. That was where I always said to myself that I'm going to keep this mission going for decades as a result of helping people that are trustworthy, that I can surround myself with. I don't want to let people down, and the mission's too important. But there was a point where I was like, wait, I don't know who I could trust. No wonder you were wondering why I was questioning. I just didn't know who I could trust. But the pivotal moment occurred where, instead of this going through my head, that I'm like, I just got to unload this company, because I'm being attacked constantly. I don't know who to trust. But what really inspired me, and I was talking about that last night with the payroll team, I started realizing there are people around me that I can trust. They fly below the radar. They're very quiet. Uh, I would say stealthy even, where I had a whole different mindset where I wanted to not let, even though I felt let down, I didn't want to let down guys like this, people that I could trust.
Right.
And knowing that I don't want to let someone down was really, and the mission's so important, and I actually, for the first time in a while, after being burned over and over, I just felt like I was reinvigorated to want to do it for the team around me again. Because through kind of like natural selection, the folks that were honest, transparent, hardworking, that really, really got me excited. And I was telling Sam the other day, I was like, I didn't really want to say this, but I kind of wanted to unload this whole thing. But now I feel like I can go another couple decades because the mission's way too freaking important to stop. We're helping thousands of kids and thousands of employees. It would just be irresponsible for a blip in the road to just unload it. But while we're on that topic, in case anyone wants to know, we are looking at acquiring organizations. So reach out to us. Oh, not me, reach out to Sam.
That was probably like the toughest part, is choosing the priority level of all of our problems, right? It's
Yeah,
still
what do we do first?
it's still what we deal with today, because every email we get almost seems to be urgent, right? So the
Every
To that
day.
person.
so that was the biggest complication, and that's also when I realized that, like, I'm being brought in for more than just producing financial statements, right? I think one of the biggest things we did that was a very drastic decision that we made was just axing all the credit cards. So in accounting, just to give you some background, and this will play into everything that we talk about here. When you're auditing and accounting, there's two types of auditing. You can audit controls, or you can do a substantive audit. And so a substantive audit means you audit everything, every single line item in there. So let's say you got an Excel spreadsheet of 1,000 lines. You're doing a substantive audit. You're auditing those lines, right? And there's nuance to it. You may sample, etc. But just for the pretext of this, then there's the other audit, which is controls. So when you're a super large organization, you can't audit 100,000 transactions a day that are running through a bank account. So you rely on things called controls. And so a control can be something very simple, right? Like, you don't want the person approving the check to be the same person writing the check, right? It's just something very simple like that. And why is that? Because if it's the same person, then they're going to approve payments to themselves and write it to themselves, right? But if you have two people, the person who's approving it can't write it to themselves, and the person who's writing it should catch that the person who approved it approve one for themselves, right? So segregation of duties is one of the biggest controls in a company. But there's multiple different types of controls. Another control would be when you see a drop down on a website, right? And it gives you a list of names, right? That's a control because you can only pick from 5 names. But if you were able to type into that, then you could type the name however you wanted it, right? So you could type Sam with a Q, right? But you just mistyped it. But if you have a drop down, then you just got to pick Sam. So there's controls in place that stop mistakes from happening inherently. And so if you have good controls, then as an audit, you just audit the controls, because you know it's literally impossible for them to type in Sam with a Q here, right? So you don't even have to worry about that being a possibility, right? And so the controls remove the amount of substantive audit you have to do. And so when we came in, there was no controls on anything. And that was probably the biggest problem. And when you're a small company, you don't need controls, because the accountant is the same one paying the bills. It's the same one doing the workers' comp. It's
And
the same
they
one.
know everything
And
coming in.
exactly.
You're fragmented across states, and your person paying bills and the person collecting, yeah, that has to be segregated, right?
Yep, and then there has to be a whole flow of it, right? So, and it has to be simple to where it's this, then that, this, then that, so that when your employees come into work every day, they know what they're doing and they can do it competently, if not well.
So, question.
I did want to add to that, interestingly enough, when you talk about controls that are required, um, it, it's such, in the accounting world, some stuff is just cut and dry, and I love it. Now, in the behavior analytic world, behavior drifts like we were talking about, and things change pretty rapidly. Even someone's performance may change. They might be going through things that they were doing a couple years ago. They don't want to necessarily tell you that they don't want to do it anymore. So in other words, I often call it like it sometimes a pitcher doesn't want to take themselves out of the game, and they know they're not necessarily hitting their marks and doing what they agreed to do, but it takes a while to start to figure that out. So
Your
one
ego
of the
kicks in.
yeah. So one of the controls that I just one day used in the behavioral analytic lens was I was not sure if somebody really was motivated to do something and if they had a lot of drift in their performance. And I remember the control I put in place was, okay, tell you what, if you could just build this one area by 5% in this state, since we're a PFP organization, you're going to get $70,000 if you could just increase this one metric, right? And that was kind of a control because the person said, I don't really want to do it. And it was what their job was. So I realized that it didn't really, that was a control. It was almost like a forced choice.
Yep.
Like, do you want to do it or not? And the way I could find that out a little quicker was, hey, here's the goal. Here's what you shoot for. It's very specific. And here's the performance, the pay for performance you will get. And that was a pivotal point where the person was like, I just don't want to do it. I'm like, could you have said that 2 years ago?
Yeah, before we started bleeding.
Exactly. Right.
Looking at the controls, are there 3 to 5 controls you could throw out there for businesses to implement so they don't have that behavior drift? I know one that you may have started to discuss is those credit cards, right? So now we have Expensify, which is an online system that tracks our credit card use, and then us as users can go on, implement and upload receipts. That way it's tracked regularly and there is no behavior drift. And there's also the ability to stop a credit card if we don't want somebody to use it anymore. So that may be one. Are there any others that you think would be beneficial for companies?
Absolutely. So in the consulting world, credit card management is a huge piece. So the 2 most important controls that I implemented immediately were the AP process and the credit card software Expensify. So what Expensify did is we now made it mandated that you have to submit all your receipts for your credit cards, upload them, and then the software matches the receipt to the transaction for you ideally, right? I know sometimes it doesn't, but it's way better than some people sending emails of their receipts that don't tie to the transactions on the credit cards.
And then you have 1,000 emails to sort through.
Right.
Exactly.
That's one person's job.
Exactly.
Like sorting through
Yeah,
receipts.
manual labor, that's a waste of time.
And there was
And
More
not
subject
precise.
to human error.
exactly. And then on top of it, the person will be spending so much time trying to match receipts that they don't even have time to quality check if the receipts are actual business expenses. So like one of the things you'd see is, DoorDash. How can you determine if DoorDash is for the clinic and because they had a meeting, or for personal because she was hungry for lunch, or whoever, right? And so
Exactly.
so when you're looking at that, right, and you see hundreds and thousands of these transactions coming through, you say, okay, we got 2 options here. We can, when you're looking for fraud, you know that 80 to 90% of the transactions are real, are relevant, right? Are actual for business purposes, because that's just how it usually works. Fraud's always a needle in a haystack. So we had the option to dive in, try and find a fraud, root it out of the thousands of transactions across 76 credit cards, or we take the fast action, the drastic action, which is what we decided to do, and we cut them all off.
Yeah.
And
It was something that created some casualties. We didn't want that, but it also prevented, like, I realized we had invoices on auto pay. Speaking of fraud, there were some invoices coming through from like fake vendors that were on auto pay, but that stopped immediately. And that just that control in itself, I didn't like how we had to come to a screeching halt. But again, if we didn't stop the bleeding, there wouldn't be an organization.
yeah, and we would have been playing whack-a-mole, right? Because
Yeah.
we found it on this credit card. All right, well, now we got 74 others to go through. Okay, and then when you're in a crunch that we were, you have to cut cash flow out immediately. You have to halt all cash outflows as much as possible. So you do that by bringing up your credit card liabilities, but like so you only got to pay your credit card once a month, right? So we want to push all transactions we can on a credit card if they're real, if they're legitimate at that time, but that's for the discernment of the executives, right? And so we had to really make a decision. And so we decided, okay, we got to stop the bleeding right now. We can't quantify how much of this is relevant to the business, how much of it is personal expenses, and we don't have the time. So the only way for us to do this is to cut off all credit cards and then have credit card users come to us and tell us the reason they need the credit card, their expected expenses for the credit card, and then we can reapprove them, right? So we had the option. And what ended up happening is probably 20 plus of the people just brought their credit cards back and never asked for another one because they know they had no justification to have the credit card in the first place, right? So then we set up a system where they have to submit receipts. We monitor the receipts. We audit them every single month. Our AP manager is able to do that because the software allows her to remove the administrative burden of matching the receipts, and she can audit them and she can make sure that all people with credit cards are submitting them. And so we had to really overhaul this process. And now if you want a credit card, it has to go through a full approval process where I give the final approval on it. So I see every single credit card that comes through now, as opposed to what it was before, where it was like, oh, you need one? Yeah, sure, here, take it, right? And it was just completely out of hand. So that was a huge drastic cut, and it was not fun. Like
Oh man, it was brutal. It almost reminds me of things that we're grinding through right now. I mean, nothing comes easy. A similar type of leak of bleeding can be, especially in a consultative industry like ours, it can be the administrative time that begins to creep. I notice this, it's like a pattern of every 5 years with our growth. All of a sudden, there isn't an eye on billable hours as opposed to administrative hours that are not billable. So, interestingly enough, as soon as we started to measure the administrative time that was non-billable, that was resulting in no margin whatsoever, we couldn't even reinvest in the organization. Once we started to measure that, what's interesting is the measurement in itself started to decrease the wasted time. Because what's fascinating, and it's an area that we're now diving into, and I know you're sick of hearing it, but we're working on our next book. If anyone can learn from this, it's tremendous. Just the idea that measurement in itself, which is very similar to the quantum physics world, I see emerging in behavioral science and quantum physics, and that one area called quantum entanglement, where one subatomic particle is being measured and it changes the other. It doesn't matter if it's across time or space. And I'm seeing parallels that way with human behavior. So example after example of the measurement, it's what they call in quantum physics collapsing the wave function. By nailing it down to an important KPI, everything falls in line. Otherwise, the performance and the behavior is in multiple topographies. No one really knows what direction to go in, but when you precisely measure it, you give feedback, it changes behavior.
Is that, in your opinion, due to the self-monitoring aspect of it? You become more apt to monitor your behavior, so you reach that goal?
Yeah, initially it is. That's a really good question and comment. Like initially, the self-monitoring part and measuring it makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But if there aren't consequences and audits, like we talked about earlier, over time it'll drift. So yeah, people, including myself, have to constantly be reminded of the KPI that we're shooting for,
Right.
or else we will drift. And once you nail down that KPI, you start seeing actions fall in line and performance fall in line with, again, the quantum physics world, which they call collapsing the wave function. And it's pretty amazing seeing we're almost at the point now where a measurement is getting so precise that systems are running themselves and all they need is some feedback.
Are they running themselves because of AI or because of the new KPIs?
It's a little combination of both. Being able to measure things that are all over the place and collapsing it with artificial intelligence is groundbreaking for us to get more precise. And in addition to things like catching the anomalies in the data, financial data, and what your history in the forensics area of accounting, looking for fraud, that in itself is groundbreaking. So speaking of artificial intelligence, I mean, I've learned a lot from Sam and some other folks in the organization that you can really speed up the execution of something by cutting out all the variability and the human error. You're always going to need that human touch, especially in the field we're in.
Right.
But with certain things like engineering, science, accounting, things that are, you really just have to get right to that result.
It's formulaic.
Yeah.
And from a behavior analyst standpoint, I welcome the AI because it makes certain tasks that I have to do every day much easier. And it frees up my ability to be a better clinician because then I can spend more time
Yeah, the people
with the
time you can
learner
focus on
rather than
instead
or
of
the
looking at
individual.
spreadsheets all day.
Right.
I think-
Not to say I don't do those audits like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier today. Just because there's AI doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to look into things and make
Yeah.
sure that's running
Because
appropriately.
that could go down the rabbit
Right.
hole in the wrong direction.
Correct.
Hallucination.
One
Did you
wrong,
ever do
one
that?
wrong prompt,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you're talking about a completely different state when you were talking about New Jersey originally.
Exactly. If
So-
it's what I've learned with the rabbit hole with, say, a ChatGPT or Gemini is that the initial launch of the types of prompts that you're giving, if they're not right on point, it's kind of like that example where the rocket is not calibrated.
Correct.
And by the time you start going down the rabbit hole with questions and answers, it could be thousands of miles off course. So those initial prompts are so important. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, in the accounting world, some of the AI that's used and some of the directions that we're going?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say one of the biggest issues that we ran into that like AI has helped a lot, and just systems as well, and they're inherently intertwined. You can't have AI without a robust system, right? And so,
Can you just, for the people that are not
yeah,
AI,
yeah, absolutely. So the system will be how we house the data, right? So if you want ChatGPT to do a quick analysis on a spreadsheet, you can just upload it, right? And it'll say, okay, give me this analysis, sort it by highest to lowest, et cetera, right? And so if you imagine that Excel spreadsheet as housing the data, you may be able to upload one to ChatGPT with 50 lines. You know what I mean? And it could understand it. 100, okay, it can understand it. But the columns have to be the same. Everything in the Excel spreadsheet has to be the same. It has to be literally out of a database for it to even make any sense of it effectively, especially on a numbers analysis, right?
I learned that the hard way where I thought that I created a system in AI that would help me get organized. And I put all this work into creating these folders within it and what I thought would be initiatives within projects. And it was really funny because like Sam was trying to be real nice about it. He was kind of like, yeah, that's cute and everything, but it ain't going to work. He didn't say it that way, but he was like, I kind of feel bad because it needs to be in
got so
Excel.
stoked about it. He had
Yeah,
to,
I
like,
was
put
really
it down.
excited. He was like,
coming to this meeting, he's like, look what I did this weekend.
Yeah.
I spent so much time on it
Yeah.
for you to be like, bro, that sucks.
And that's an example where the rocket, I mean, I spent weekends on this, like the rocket launched in the wrong direction. And like you're saying, the Excel spreadsheet or whatever has the guardrails to keep things where it needs to be. But AI would hallucinate or it would forget when I thought it had a memory.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
no, you're good. So like if you think about an Excel spreadsheet and every column's the same, that's usually an output from a system, right? So if we pull from Central Reach or from QuickBooks or anything, it's always the same columns, right? And so AI needs to have it standardized in order for it to understand it. I also have to have it standardized in order for me to understand it. So that was part of the push. Is I'm like, can I get one column that matches on this report? You know, I was like, can column A always be the same when I'm looking at this report, right? And so but you need the underlying data to be clean to even perform any analysis on it, and that's human or AI, but especially AI. With humans, you can work through a lot of the errors. With AI, it'll hallucinate for you. So the systems were probably the biggest overhaul that we did, and we're still pushing through, but much better than this point last year.
What do you think the future of accounting is, and organizational, I guess, management with AI? I know people are very fearful of it. Others lean into it. What do you see the future? I mean, because like Sam's not just a CPA and an accountant. He's really more a thought leader because he's thinking decades in advance and where we need to go. Like, what actions do we need to take now so the rocket's in the right direction? Where do you see? I know I'm surprising with some of
No,
these
all good,
random
all good.
questions, but where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think accounting is ripe for AI to like completely change the landscape. Like if we look at engineering right now, like coding, they're not hiring like they used to, and it's simply because the efficiency that AI has created for programmers and engineers, right? You can crank out way more code and audit the code at 10 times the pace than you could just code it yourself regularly. I think the same thing is ripe for accounting. Many of bookkeeping tasks, AI is already doing. For example, QBO has an AI agent in it that's QuickBooks Online. Many of the accounting softwares have book agents in them. I think one of the most effective things that I've seen from AI in accounting is month-end close and flux analysis. So at the end of each month in each quarter, you create a report that's showing year to date this year versus year to date last year, and you look at the comparison, and then you create a threshold. Anything that's greater than a 10% change or greater than $5,000, we need to investigate, right? So
Yeah.
any variance,
Triggers.
yeah, exactly. And so this is called a flux analysis. So any unexpected fluctuations we have to analyze. When I was working for Penn doing SEC reporting, this was a whole week task that we would do. Then we'd send it to the CFO, and she would give us our notes, and then we'd come back and do it again, right? So it would be a 3-week task of just explaining why the numbers are moving in the financial statements. We're in the process of implementing our month-end close software right now to really tie a bow on the accounting and make it perfect. And I was diving into the AI capabilities there, and it's impressive, right? Like the flux analysis that I would spend weeks on prior. The AI will do it, and you just have to double check that all the numbers are right and that the analysis makes sense. So
And then you could focus on what you need to.
exact, and then I can focus on analyzing the analysis and taking actions on where we need to take the action. So if I see a 25% increase in one of our operating expenses, I need to look at that flux analysis and identify what led to that immediately, right? Or if we see payroll creep, right? Or if we see margin decreasing, all of this will be stuff that will be caught on a weekly flux or a monthly flux analysis that you do after month end close. But the financial reporting team for a public company is huge, right?
Yeah.
When you're working for a smaller company, the more people wear more hats, and so you're adding more to each person's plate as they become more competent at their job, right? So I think that's another big learning experience that we've had, mainly me, is that you can't just dump something on somebody's plate and immediately expect them to be effective at it, right? To go back to the credit cards, when we first implemented it, it was brutal. And we fielded hundreds of emails from people and just organizing the receipts. And now our AP managers has it rolling. She's closing the books and killing it. So but it took 6 months to get there for her to be comfortable with the software and for our staff to be comfortable submitting receipts, right? So that the AI helps, but we're always going to have the human point of contact. So just to get back to it, when I think about like accounting and the improvements, you're always going to need a top level person to sign off on it, because the CEO can't go to the AI and get mad at the AI for messing up the books. You know what I'm saying? He has to go to a person who's responsible.
And the future of work, I know people are always worried about their jobs being replaced. I mean, what I've come to realize, at least at this stage in AI, experiencing it within our own organization, 2 years ago, I kept saying, guys, like our administrative, a lot of times being wasted on manual things that we're doing administratively. I remember saying, if you guys could just use this to augment your performance, this AI, it's just going to add to your productivity,
Right.
and you're going to spend more time doing things you like and doing things that are effective for the organization. The interesting thing was, I mean, it was painful. There were a small segment of people that did not want to change, and as a result of that, they're not here. But those that did really are escalating and we're able to help more kids instead of all the manual labor.
Yeah.
I think too, the way to look at it is it's not going anywhere.
Yep.
So you either learn how to use it to your advantage and be smart and safe with it, rather than being behind the 8 ball and continue to fall farther and farther behind because you can't catch up.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
it's not going to eliminate itself.
in the end, if you're not using it, you're obsolete. Your repertoire is going to be obsolete over time. And the area, the last thing I was going to say is, like, the area of use of artificial intelligence, it goes into so many different areas. Even conversations we've had, and realizing that, for example, with Jarvis, our Boston Dynamics robot, just even having Jarvis at my house and having it analyze through pictures and video human behavior, what we're working on now is just so exciting, because we can be more precise in changing our students' behavior and our behavior analysts' behavior. We can be better BCBAs if we're using AI, because it's not making mistakes. And the more and more data that it's receiving, with all the correct sign-offs where guardians are okay with it, we can be more precise in understanding, okay, over the last 100 episodes of this behavior, the conditional probability of it is usually that it's preceded by this antecedent and it's followed by this consequence. And it's going to take all the data, and we already have it working that way, where it's more precise. Behavior analysts will use it as a tool, and we're working on the system where they get live coaching in it. Hopefully, you guys or whoever's watching this really learn from some of our mistakes, and it can kind of get you ahead of the curve. So if you guys found any value in this, please let us know in the comments, because we'll continue this dialogue. So again, it'll be the data that drives whether or not this discussion was valuable for other people, and we're looking forward to diving further into it. And I just want to thank you guys, Kate, Sam. Appreciate it. Sweet Tea, Romano, we're back.